I love the way old abandoned buildings look. If you couldn't tell from the videos that I posted about apocalyptic stuff in the past, this dark grungy vibe is just extremely captivating to me for some reason. And I was scrolling through ArtStation as everybody does, and I saw this amazing artwork. It instantly caught my eye, and I scrolled down to see this building. I love the composition. I love the vibe here, so I challenged myself to recreate this vibe in Blender. Before I jump into Blender, I just quickly try to identify main aspects of the image that I definitely want to include and identifying important compositional aspects of the image. Also, if you're interested in exclusive tutorials like this where I create a whole mine, a historical Alaskan mine from the 1930s in Blender, where I explain my whole process and break down how I do everything from start to finish, I would recommend you check my Patreon out. I also provide all my Blender files and exclusive assets for all the projects I create on this channel. So if you're interested in that, please check it out. It also supports the channel and allows me to make more videos like this. And with all that done, let's jump into Blender. For the buildings, I'm going to put down a wide cube and a tall cube for the side building. I only roughly align my camera to the main building because I don't find it necessary to completely copy everything about the image. For the roof, I'm going to select the top face, Shift D to duplicate it, press I to insert inside of it, and pull that face up and scale it down a little. That's going to give us a good block out for the roof. For the side building, I'm going to do the same process, but I'm going to add some extra extrusions to make the attic for the side building. Then I hop onto Megascans to get a good plaster texture for the wall. I like to get a blank texture like this with just some extra detail into it so I can modify it better in Blender myself. In the material editor, I'll add a mix color node, set it to multiply, and set the B factor to pretty red. And now you can adjust the factor to get an exact red color that you like. I'm trying to match it to the reference. Then you can add a further hue saturation node on top to adjust it better. Now to make the roof out of those metal pieces, I'll bring in an image texture. And then I'll use the knife tool you can get by pressing K and cut out the bits and pieces that I think would fit the scene the best. I'm not taking the ones that have a lot of noise in them. Also, if you make a bad cut, you can just select any vertex or edge and double tap G, which allows you to move that vertex freely without stretching the UVs. After you're happy with your result, just select all of the ones that you like, press P, and make your selection separate. And you can delete the previous image. One free add-on that I love using is the clicker add-on. It allows you to do a lot of things, but the one thing I love to use it for is move origins to the bottom. You just go to this option, click it, and it does what it says. After I'm done with that, I start aligning all of these metal pieces to the roof. I just move them there and match the rotation of each one of them. To give them a proper 3D look, go into edit mode and add edge loops. Match each edge loop to where the real indent in the image is supposed to be. Then select all of them and press bevel and scroll up to add an extra edge loop in the middle. Then you can just select all of the middle edge loops and pull them down by pressing G. Repeat the same process for the rest of the pieces. Now randomly arrange them to fill the rest of the roof. After you've done all that, I would recommend using proportional editing. Just move the pieces a little so that they look a little non-uniform, as nothing in life is properly uniform. Then create some cubes along the roof. We are going to use these cubes as booleans. After I have all these 4 cubes, I select each piece, make sure that the cube covers all of the pieces, and boolean them. I repeat the process with all of the parts, and this is the final result. I go in and create windows for the top attic and also add in a chimney. You can just duplicate them for the second part. They add a really pleasing silhouette to the building. Now let me show you how I got this really nice texture variation in the building. First, I'm going to select all of these nodes and press Ctrl G to group them. I'm going to name this group red. That's the base color. Then I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to rename it to light red. Then I'm going to blend them together with a mix shader and choose this nice roughness variation texture that I got from Megascans. I'm going to put in a color ramp. I'm going to change the value to 2 for the light red and mix them together using the roughness variation. Squeeze into the values and go back to visualize the difference. You'll notice that now you have chipped paint and nice texture variation with the reds. And you can also scale it up to get the exact value you like. Another thing you can do is bring in a secondary roughness variation texture and then multiply those two together using some factor of like 0.7. Don't go 1, otherwise it might look too harsh. And now we have nice texture variation for the first layer. For the second layer, copy over your roughness textures that you got for the factor, and this time with the new node group, I'm going to saturate it very high because we are going to name it bright red. The more texture variation, the better. Now we're going to do some displacement, so I switch to Eevee, and using the same mask nodes that we were using before as a factor, I'm going to multiply 2 different displacements from the 2 different nodes and set one of the mid levels to higher or lower depending on the one you want on the top. Adds a nice bump and additional detail into your scene. For the third layer, I'm going to create an image texture and make it 2K in size and use that as a factor instead, because this time we're going to paint it. I'm going to call it dark red and desaturate it and reduce the value by a lot, maybe 0.4. And now bring in a decent brush texture that you're going to use to paint. You can find a lot of nice brushes on Quickfill Bridge. And when I'm painting details, I'm also erasing certain areas. That's very important. And also making sure to create some nice streaks that add some character to your building, because just adding some random grunge is not the best way to do details like this. You should always add some interesting character to your building since you're hand painting anyways. I repeat the same process for a fourth layer, but this time I make it more dirty and kind of dusty. But I want it to be below our dark layer because I want the dark layer to be on top, as it's the most important one in the building. And after I paint all of that in, this is the result that we get. Now I apply the same texture to the side building, unwrap it, but now I'm going to recreate the whole texture painting areas because they're not procedural. The procedural changes carry over, but the hand painted textures would have to be repainted, and I just add some interesting detail and variation into the side building as well. I stop when I feel like the buildings have enough character and detail. Now I bring 2 human mannequins for reference and start making booleans for the doors and the windows into the scene. You can just create one cube, add it as the boolean, and now you can just copy that cube and use that as the windows as well. After I've done the booleans on the main building, I also use the same cube as a boolean on the side building. This is how it looks. Now we're going to create windows using image textures. For that, I'm going to cut out the windows from this image using the knife tool again. After I've cut them out and separated them, I'm going to start adding edge loops to them. I add edge loops everywhere I want to extrude certain parts out for the wood. For creating the window part glossy, I create a new material slot and assign that where the glass is supposed to be. Then I go back into the shader and add a glossy material to it. And using an add shader, I add the glossy material and to tone down the roughness. And you'll notice that now it reflects while still keeping its original color. I use all 4 varieties into different places to create nice variation. Then for the wider windows, I bring in a new image texture and repeat the same process, cut them out, add the edge loops, and put them into their respective places. If you feel like the color is too bright, you can go back to your glass shader, and in the glossy factor, you can add the color as well. And you can also use a hue saturation node to tone it down. And now it's looking much better. Now I want to make some quick chip damage into the building, so I use the OCD add-on and just make some damage into it and bake it. It's not a lot, but it adds a lot of nice detail on the sides. Then I repeat the same process that I did for the main building for the side building. I copy over some pieces that I like from the main building and then separate them as their own parts and then place them on the side building. Then I create some cuts in the side building that I'm going to extrude out, which I forgot to do before, and I'm going to bevel them as well. After I bevel them, I apply a new metal material on the top, just creating a new material slot. I also created these side cubes that act as like a side extruded room or an entrance and an exit to the building, and I'm going to paint in the same mask to them as well. Then I model this metal beam using the same modeling techniques I used before. I'm going to unwrap it and apply the same metal texture to it. I'm going to use it to also create these top parts. Then I bring in another image texture, repeat the same process with that, and now I'm going to use that to place the windows on the top attic. I create the roof cover using the same metal base, then I unwrap them and apply the same texture that we did before to them, and then I hand paint in some texture detail on top of that as well. Now on how I created the snow on the top, I did a little bit of a different process because they were all joined up together and share similar UVs. If I unwrap it, it's gonna mess up all of the texturing. So I create a new UV map, and this UV map is not gonna impact our main texture, but we can use the secondary UV map as the image texture for the mask that we're gonna paint in for the snow. So now I bring in a snow texture, and for the snow texture, I remove the texture coordinate node and add a UV map and set the UV map to the new one that we just created. Then bring in an image texture, create a completely new one. So I make it the size 2K, plug your nodes into the factor, and then copy over the UV map that we created, and now you can just start painting. This won't affect anything else, and now it's on you how you want the snow to fall on, and you can just create some nice texture variation there. And this is how it looks. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Then I'm just going to model some other stuff. I bring in a Megascan store, you can get it from Quickfill Bridge, and I just model this nice silhouette around it, and I'm going to apply the same material of the metal texture onto it. I subdivide the ground by a lot and add a displace modifier to it with a pretty low strength. Then I create some basic cubes that I'm gonna give some variation to. Then I'm gonna add a wood texture to them. Also get an object info node and plug the random into the location. That means whenever you duplicate the fence parts, they will have a random texture instead of the same one being duplicated over and over again. Then I apply the array modifier. Then I use the randomized transform modifier to give them a lot of variation. This is a very crucial part because it breaks up the monotony of the array modifier. I also make these cubes, give them some displacement, and use them as booleans to just cut certain parts of the mesh of the fence, so that just gives more variation into it. Then I just start deleting some parts and randomize them as much as I can, add a lot of variation, flattening certain parts out, destroying certain parts, removing certain parts. Then to make the scene a little more dynamic, I add an area light on the top. I use a black body node and set the temperature to 4500 and put it on the top. That just creates more focus onto the main subject. Then I duplicate these lights and just put them around in different areas. I use the third one as an edge light on the top. Bring in a background image for the sky, make it huge so it covers up the entire camera. Then go into the material section, make the roughness very high, add a hue saturation node so you can change it to make it more blue. Then go into the emission and plug it in. Make the emission pretty low, like 0.1. For the volume, create a big cube, add some volume scatter to it with pretty low density. Also don't want my lights to affect the volume, so I check off the volume scatter box. I also go into the volume shader and add a light path node and a math node, set the math node to multiply, and plug in the is camera into the value and plug that into the density. That basically removes all the shadow from the volume, so it makes it look a little brighter. I really like the look the volume brings into the scene. Now I'm going to break down how I did this detailed snow texture. Bring in a decent ground texture, then mix it with the snow texture with an image mask and start painting out basic path coming out of the snow texture, masking it out, create some nice detail in there. I want to create these two tire tracks going in towards the building. That creates a better compositional guide. After you've painted in something that you're happy with, select the area that is visible in the foreground and separate it so that you can subdivide it further. Then add the two displacements, and as a factor in the mix color, add your mask that you just painted and put one of them higher and one of them lower so that the snow is a little higher than the ground. Then, using a color ramp, you can adjust the way the snow blends with the texture. Then try and go back in and paint to perfect the exact look you want. Usually 2 to 3 passes are required at minimum to create a decent detailed ground. Then I take a break from the ground and move on to the other details into the scene, and then I go back to the ground to finalize it with better detail. I want to create some poles, so I create a pole and just add some basic detail into it. I'm adding some basic iron pieces that hold things up. I also create a Bezier cube, and I want to draw these onto the mesh, just kind of disoriented wires, and give them some thickness. Then I create longer wires using the same process, one end on one pole, the other on the other, and you can just scale them up a little and rotate them to make them more droopy. Then just duplicate them all over, give them the same metal texture, make them a little darker, and that helps a lot. Now here I'm just creating more random detail, just disorganized jumble of wires. That helps add more detail into the scene as well. Here I'm creating another pipe on the main building. Here I'm just putting the pipe manually exactly how I want it to go up and collect rainwater from the top and bring it down to the bottom and give it some thickness, then apply it to and convert it to a mesh. Now after you convert it to a mesh, I just want to select some loops and extrude them out. I want to give the pipe a little protection thing so the water doesn't leak in the corners. I also create some droopy wires. I'm not really sure what this was supposed to be in the reference, but since it's there, I recreated it. I go on Sketchfab and get this antenna model. I download it as a USD. Then I put it in the back. After I've arranged them in a way that I'm happy, I create more wires connecting towards them. Just adding this kind of detail always helps. Retouching the fence a little bit. Then I create this snow clump. I just go in sculpt mode and sculpt it out. It's just supposed to give a little more snow buildup in certain areas. I just apply the same snow texture to it and just duplicate it all over the place. So it looks like there's a certain amount of snow building up in around the fence. I also put this metal bit here. I get a tree, remove all the leaves because I want it to be dry and certain trees in the back. And this is how it looks after I've made all those changes. The scene is starting to come together. I create this snow texture. I'm going to go in texture paint mode and paint on top of this texture, so that I can create a little bit more detail. This is going to be the snow that I'm going to make fall off of a plane using the particle system. I'm just creating a little bit more detail into it right here. Then I just use mix color and mix it with a translucent shader. You can adjust it using a color ramp, and here we have our snow particle that's going to fall off. Then I go into a plane, add a particle system, use the object, give it some basic rotation and velocity as it falls down, and there you have it. I also add a turbulence force with a decent amount of force. And that's how simple it is to create a falling snow animation. Now you just set your frame start and frame end, and then you can just bake it. Now it just always plays whenever you're creating your scene. I go inside one of the windows and give them a solidify modifier and remove the glossy and add a glass modifier instead. And I bring in an image of a kitchen and just blur the glass a little so the viewer can't really see what's going on inside. I also create a spotlight, give it a bit of a high power and increase its radius. Then I'm going to go into the emission nodes and give it a black body node so it can accurately give off a more warm tone. 3500 works, and then you can just play around with the strength. After I'm happy with that, I go back into creating more detail for the snow. And the way I do that is I get the roughness of the ground texture and I mix it with a color ramp and multiply it using color burn with our mask that we hand painted. And the factor is 0.8. Don't set it to completely 1 or it's going to look too strange and too sharp. 0.8 works for this value, and using that into the mix factor, it just works. That's all you have to do to create a little more extra detail. And now using a lower strength, you can just paint in certain areas that have kind of melted snow look, so it just looks a little more noisy. And now after tweaking all of that, I go into the compositor before doing the final render, go and get a lens distortion node and a glare node. For the glare node, I set it to fog glow as usual, set the quality to high, play around with the threshold and see what works the best. Usually I go with like a pretty low mix factor and turn the size down to 7. For the lens distortion node, I like to add a little bit of distortion because the real life camera also has a little bit of distortion in it, and also a little bit of dispersion. For dispersion, a very low value works, and for distortion, I go with -0.2. That's usually my go-to for most of my videos. And now I take it into DaVinci to do the final color grade, and this is the final result. Thank you for watching. I would be happy to hear any feedback you have, and maybe check out my Patreon. See you in the next video.